In 2010, on the island of Crete, a team of archaeologists found something that should not have been there: stone tools, hundreds of them, hand axes, scrapers, cleavers, buried in terraces that had been lifted up and away from the shoreline over hundreds of thousands of years of geological drift. They dated the surrounding rock, over 130,000 years old, possibly closer to 700,000. There was a problem with that number. Crete is an island. It has been an island for millions of years. Whoever left those tools did not walk there. They crossed open water to get there. And whoever did it before anyone alive today would call them human. Here's the story you were never taught about how sailing actually began. It does not start with Egypt, or with sails, or with anyone who could write down what they were doing. It starts hundreds of thousands of years earlier with a species that may not have had language, crossing distances of open sea that should have been physically impossible for them to survive. Start with the island of Flores in Indonesia. Researchers found stone tools there dating back 7 to 800,000 years. The tools matched a style used by Homo erectus, one of our most distant ancestors, a species that existed long before modern humans, long before Neanderthals, long before anyone who looked anything like you. The problem is the same one from Crete, just older and stranger. Flores is separated from the nearest island by at least 19 kilometers of open water. Even at the lowest sea level in the planet's entire history, that gap never closed. There was never a bridge. There was never a moment you could simply walk across. Something crossed that water anyway. And once researchers started looking, Flores was not an isolated case. Evidence emerged of a similar crossing in the Philippines, dated to roughly 700,000 years ago. Then, in 2008, Russian researchers found primitive stone tools on Socotra, an island so remote it sits more than 150 miles off the Horn of Africa and nearly 240 miles from the nearest coast of Yemen. There is no version of low sea levels, no version of any ice age that closes a gap that size. Then the Crete discovery pushed the timeline further. Then, in 2022, a separate team found evidence that hominins crossed the Aegean Sea as long as 450,000 years ago in a region of the Mediterranean. Every time scientists assumed they had found the earliest case of a human relative crossing open ocean, the ground gave way beneath that assumption, and an older one appeared underneath it. Here is where the field split into two camps that still have not agreed. One side argues this could not have happened by accident. Crossing 19 kilometers of open water repeatedly, on multiple separate occasions across different regions of the world, is not the kind of thing that happens through random chance. It requires planning. It requires constructing something that floats and holds together long enough to survive the crossing. It may have required language, simply to coordinate the effort of building and launching whatever carried them. One researcher decided to test that claim directly, rather than simply argue it. Archaeologist Robert Bednarik built a raft using only the materials and stone tools available to Homo erectus. No metal, no rope beyond what could be twisted from plant fiber, no tools more advanced than the crude hand axes found at these sites. He named it Nale Tassi, and he sailed it across open water to prove the crossing was physically achievable with what erectus actually had. It held together. It worked. Bednarik's conclusion was direct. A quantum leap in cognition and technology, he argued, occurred long before anyone assumed it had. Everything we associate with being modern, he claimed, may have started far earlier than the fossil record of brain size alone would suggest. If true, this means a species without modern human brains was engaging in deliberate, structured problem-solving on a level we assumed was unique to us. The other side disagrees entirely. These researchers argue there is a simpler explanation, and that building a working replica under modern, intentional conditions proves nothing about what erectus actually did hundreds of thousands of years ago. Tsunamis, cyclones, storm surges violent enough to tear loose entire mats of vegetation, root systems, fallen trees, and sweep them out to sea with anything standing on them still attached. Under this theory, nobody built a boat. Nobody planned a voyage. A storm hit, the ground beneath them gave way, and the survivors who happened to wash up on a distant shore became, by pure accident, among the only sailors in the species' history. Critics of the deliberate voyage theory point out something uncomfortable for that side of the argument. Building a functioning raft today with full knowledge of what you are trying to achieve and exactly why says very little about whether a species with a brain roughly two-thirds the size of yours could conceive of the same plan from nothing, with no prior example to copy. Both explanations terrify in different ways. One means an animal we consider primitive may have built and coordinated the construction of a seafaring vessel using nothing but the materials and intelligence available hundreds of thousands of years before any tool we would recognize as a boat. The other means the only reason any of them survived to reach that shore at all was a force of nature violent enough to rip them from the world they knew and deposit them, broken and starving, somewhere they never intended to be. Either way, somebody survived something that should have killed them, and what they survived may not have involved a single deliberate decision. Now move the timeline forward, hundreds of thousands of years, to the part of this story you probably already know exists, but likely never knew the actual date of. The earliest boat ever recovered by archaeologists was found in the Netherlands. It is approximately 10,000 years old. Convincing physical evidence of an actual sail, a structure designed to catch wind and propel a vessel without relying entirely on human effort, does not appear until Egypt's Old Kingdom, somewhere around 2,500 years before the modern era. And it is not until roughly 2,000 years before that point that we find solid evidence of sailors crossing genuine open ocean on a route connecting India and Arabia, using sails specifically built for that purpose. Sit with that gap for a moment. Hundreds of thousands of years separate the first confirmed open water crossing by a human relative from the first confirmed sail. For almost the entire span of that gap, whoever was crossing oceans was doing it with no rigging, no mast, no wind capture technology of any kind. They were doing it on rafts, on logs, possibly on torn vegetation mats ripped loose by a storm, propelled by nothing but current, luck, and whatever the ocean decided to do with them. The sail did not start sailing. The sail showed up at the end of a story that had already been running for the better part of 1,000,000 years. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. We like to imagine progress as a straight climbing line. Fire, then tools, then language, then boats, then sails, then ships. Each one a deliberate improvement built by minds increasingly like our own. The truth sitting in the geological record does not support that story. The truth suggests the ocean was crossed long before anyone had the tools, the planning, or possibly even the language to cross it on purpose. Which means the real first sailors in this story may never have intended to sail at all. They may have been standing on solid ground, in a world that made sense when the ground stopped being solid, when the water came up around them faster than they could process what was happening, when whatever they were standing on tore free and carried them out past the point where the shore was visible behind them, into water with no edges, no landmarks, nothing but horizon in every direction they turned. And some of them lived, not because they were prepared, not because they understood what was happening to them. They lived because, against odds that should have ended everything, the current pushed them somewhere with land before their bodies gave out. They climbed onto a shore they never aimed for, on an island they never knew existed, having survived a journey across open ocean that nothing in their experience had prepared them to survive. We do not know if they understood what had just happened to them. We do not know if they ever told anyone, in whatever language or gesture they had, what the water had felt like, or how long they were out there, or whether they believed they were going to die before the shore appeared. We only know the tools they left behind. Stone, dated, sitting in terraces lifted slowly out of the sea over hundreds of thousands of years, waiting for someone to find them and ask the question nobody had thought to ask before. How did you get here? The honest answer is that we still do not fully know. We have two competing explanations, both supported by real evidence, both terrifying in their own direction. What we do know is that long before anyone built a sail, long before anyone could explain in words what they had done, something crossed the open ocean and survived it. You are descended, however distantly, from whoever that was. The next time you look out at open water and feel even a flicker of unease at how far the horizon stretches, at how little there is to hold onto out there, consider this. Something that came before you felt that same vast, edgeless water close in around them, with no boat, no sail, and quite possibly no understanding of what was happening at all. And somehow they made it to the other side.